This is Jay Rutherford making a recording for the Duke University W.R. Perkins Audiovisual Facility in Durham, North Carolina. The subject today is a fascinating, legendary man who has led a daring life on three countries, intertwining history, war, politics, hotelier, and public relations as a career. And this portion is not to be used as part of the basic documentary. It is only to clue in the student or scholar what the subject is. The actual lead title will begin the opening of the material, which is part of the authorized recording. Nothing else to be used. That is only identifying and establishing. It's not so much a biographical description of Colonel Obolensky with chronological facts of events he's participated in, but we want to record for posterity his views as one man who's seen the decline and fall of Tsarist Russia, the rise of the revolution, who fought the Bolsheviks, who fled to Europe. It's not part of the authorized lead. The part will open up with the J.R. introduction, quote, since so much of biography and history of Colonel Serge Obolensky. From that point on is the official recording. First, the St. Regis, the ambassador in New York, resort hotels in Dominica, the Sherry Netherlands, and his imprint in Baltimore put a style and character and quality into New York life, as well as his associates and companions in the female. This material is only identifying. The opening line will be, since so much of biography and history. This is Jay Rutherford, an interview with Colonel Serge Obolensky, August 31st, 1974, for the Duke University Audiovisual Library. Since so much of biography and history of Colonel Serge Obolensky have been preserved in his epical book, One Man in His Time, published in 1958, this review of his career primarily will focus on his personal observations, philosophy, and perspective. This will set the stage of One Man in His Time, relating for the Duke University Library Audiovisual Center the immense and sweeping changes that have occurred since his birth, October 3rd, 1890, in a leafy park near the summer palace of the Emperor of Russia, and the world today on this September 1974. Colonel Obolensky, what was it like to be a young man of noble background growing up in Imperial Russia?
It all depends on the family. My father was a general, a liberal. He believed in parliamentary form of government, and I was educated in the Russian gymnasium, which is the equivalent of a German gymnasium, 8 years of study, and then the baccalaureate, the Russian University in St. Petersburg for a year, and 3 years at Christchurch, Oxford, where I studied political economy and poor law, and local government. I was exempt from military service because by the laws of the country, everyone had to serve in the army when they were 21. But if your father was 62 and when you were 21 and your younger brother was 5 years younger, you were exempt from military service and got a white ticket. I came under that rule. And father wanted me to serve by the elections in local government, which he felt was the coming forces of Russia were working at the time. We eventually became the temporary government of Kerensky. I took a great interest in our local government in the district of Nizhny Novgorod on the Volga, where Father had his estate and which I inherited after his death in 1912. I saw the great development that was happening in Russia at the time because Prime Minister Stolypin, who was killed a couple of years before by an assassin, created saw that it was necessary to give the people, the peasants, the farmers, more land. So every large estate was ordered to get a big chunk of the estate and have it divided in 50 and 100 acre farms. It was done, started in 1905 and lasted until the revolution. In 1914, when the war broke out, there were 19 million farmers set on farms of that type. The owner of the property, the original owner of the property, was paid in bonds by a special bank, and the local government were financed by the central government to build a house, a barn, and gave a contract to the International Harvest Company to implement the farmers with tools for tilling the land. That worked beautifully, and it created a mass of individual farmers, conservative people, who the Bolsheviks later on, when they came to power, called the kulaks, and sent red guard troops to collect them off their farms and send them off to Siberia. These lands that were thus in the hands again of the government were formed into kolkhozes and sovkhozes, which you probably heard about, run by the government. And the same people who worked for themselves had to actually give so many hours a day to work for the government at a very measly price. The country, because of that, in 1914 was booming, and there was plenty of everything, except still there was a great demand on the local peasantry for more land, which was the famous agrarian question that hasn't been quite solved. And eventually brought to power the Bolshevik government, but much later on. I was at Oxford in 1914, just before the war, and got home in time to see the declaration of war, when I joined my father's regiment, the Chevalier Guards, as a buck private. because Father told me as a legacy that that in case of war, I, as a Russian citizen, owned everything first to his country, to your country, second to your family, third to yourself. But if there was a war, even if I had white tickets, I ought to join up, and the only way to join up was to join up as a private. If you had high school or university education, instead of serving 3 years, as everyone had to, you served only 11 months, then passed your examination as an officer school and were made an officer. So that's what I embarked on, and went to my father's regiment and joined the Shady Guard as a buck private. I was shipped into East Prussia, and from there on I remained in the war until the revolution, and finally fought in the revolution in the Crimea, and got out and back to Europe.
Did you know any of the Bolshevik military leaders or political personalities yourself?
I was in the army, and I was concentrating on the fighting, and there was not much time to mix up with the political leaders. But I knew some of them very well. For instance, I knew the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Tereshchenko, who was Minister of Foreign Affairs for the Kerensky government. He's a liberal and exceedingly interesting man. He actually tried to organize the escape of the emperor and his family, but Kerensky was worried about the shakiness of his regime and tried to get the emperor and his family out to England. The result of it was Tereshchenko went to Sir George Buchanan and asked him to see if it could be done. Buchanan had to do it through channels, send a telegram to Lloyd George, and the answer came no. I checked on that later on with Sir George, already in exile in London when I was working there later on, and Sir George told me that was exact. And also I checked with the Duke of Windsor much later. He says, don't I know it? Because Father was so angry that Lloyd George did it unilaterally without consulting him, because the Emperor was a cousin of the King, that he wouldn't ever receive or talk to him.
True, Colonel, that the Soviet military put a price on your head.
No, it wasn't the military. I joined the White Corps. I was in Yalta, recovering from my shell shock right after the revolution, and I saw the Reds the Reds were slowly gaining ground in the south, and eventually the Sebastopol fleet turned red. So I went on to the center of the Crimea, Simferopol, where the Tatar government, local Tatar government had formed, and where I got in touch with the local Tatars. And I took part in fighting with the Tartars against the sailors and the rabble that they collected in around Yalta. And that's how, when I had a house, and I was married then at that time at Yalta, and I joined, having joined with the Tatars, the local Red Zodiac that was formed at Yalta took a portrait of me by Florin, which I still have, and put it in the Soviet, in the local Soviet, and I put a price on my head for dead or alive. So that's how it was entirely a local thing. But keep in mind that the system that the Bolsheviks had taken at the time was to destroy the Russian Guards, the Russian army that was loyal to the Constituent Assembly. And therefore, they had to be exterminated, and they were very systematic about it, taking and knocking down every man on their list who belonged to one of those regiments that were well known to belong to the Constituent Assembly.
Obolensky, what factors sealed the doom of the Kerensky government which had succeeded the imperial government of Russia?
There were several factors. First of all, I'm afraid Prime Minister Kerensky was weak. And he had no determination. He was a marvelous orator, but he didn't believe, as many of our liberals, that they ought to touch the Reds on their left flank of the Bolsheviks. And he gave too much freedom to the group around Lenin and Stalin, who only thought of how to dislodge him, and which they did. And that was, I'm afraid, the reason why the revolution happened. Kerensky had a great chance of arresting them, because they were all, including Lenin, Trotsky, Stalin, in the villa of the Kretinsky near Petersburg, about 100 of them, and he ordered the loyal troops of the Constituent Assembly, I belong to them, to surround the villa for the purpose of arresting them. Well, the troops surrounded the villa, but the order never came. And I'm afraid that indecision of Kerensky cost 20 million Russian lives that were destroyed. They were killed by the Bolshevik regime. I put that in my book, One Man at a Time. And apparently Kerensky got it and read it, because he rang me up from California, where he was writing, I think, his memoir. And I was touched, because I didn't want to say that it was fault of Kerensky. I only said that the order never came. So the former Prime Minister, who I knew also, rang me up and said, "Thank you. You've been very kind to me. It's no use ever kicking a man when he knows that he made a great mistake in his life." And I'm afraid he did.
Colonel Obolensky, to what extent was the Soviet revolution financed and supported from abroad?
I think originally it was conceived by the German headquarters with Lindenlof, who sent Lenin and his friends to Russia in a sealed train. They arrived from Switzerland, and that's where they started operating in Russia, and slowly permeated the whole spectre of the Russian politics at the time and took hold of the Russian government. The Tsarist government was always accused of being anti-Jewish. I don't believe that, but I know the arguments that were made why the Jews weren't allowed en masse beyond the limits of Poland to come into Russia. The argument by the conservative government of St. Petersburg believed that if they opened these gates, that the great, how should I say, savoir-faire and business aggressiveness of the Jewish community would be detrimental to the average Russian. I personally didn't believe it, but I was fully aware of it. Naturally, they also said that a lot of the financing was done from America, but that I only heard it by hearsay. I think the sympathies here were against for the Zelensky government, but obviously anti-Tsarist government. On the other hand, it's very interesting. There are some leading Jews were in very high positions in Russia. There was a lawyer called Mr. Schlossberg, who I knew personally, a charming, enlightened man, who was counsel for the Ministry of the Interior. My uncle was minister at the time, and you know, the Ministry of the Interior controlled also the Secret Service. So Schlossberg was in a position to know very well what was going on in Russia before the revolution, during the revolution, and after. I met him in Paris, and I begged him to write his memoirs, because it's the only person really who would be believed and write them absolutely as he saw it. He was a liberal, anti-Bolshevik, because he thought that the Bolsheviks had usurped the freedom of the Russian people. But I also decided it was worth financing him, so I arranged the possibility of him being financed for his book that he wrote in Russian. That book has never been translated, and I'm just waiting to find out where his son was, because he died since, to have that book, to get him to do the translation or give the authorization for its publishing in English.
Colonel, supposing at some distant hypothetical time in the future, the Soviet authority disintegrates and falls, what will become of the autonomous federal states such as Ukraine, Crimea, Georgia, etc.?
I'm a liberal, father was a liberal, and I was also brought up on the playground of Oxford. And I became firmly convinced that the only good form of government is the parliamentary system. And that's what I was hoping Russia will eventually become a country governed by a parliament belonging to the people. Now, a lot of things have happened, and Russia now, as you know, is under the tutelage of the Communist Party, which is a very strong organization, right through to the minor groups in the villages, in the districts, villages, etc., army and everything. So they're very well in the struggle. Now, to what extent it can last, I don't know, but they've managed, notwithstanding their bureaucratic form of government, which is but to be bureaucratic, under the order of a strongly centralized person. Can they continue to exist with the people getting more and more educated and liberalized? I don't know. But in case something happens, I think that there's a lot of centrifugal forces in Russia. The Ukraine, I know we have a strong Ukrainian group in America who want the partition of Russia. There are the Caucasus. There are the countries alongside Russia that are under the influence of the Bolshevik government because it has a strong army which is very well equipped. If you also a very strong navy, they have the atoms. So, notwithstanding all that, it's very difficult to say how it will go along. But if the Bolshevik regime falls, these these centrifugal forces like the Caucasus, Armenia, all the countries alongside the borders of Russia would want their independence. Now, Russia very much depends on the harvest and the bread basket of Russia, the Ukraine, for its food. So the north of Russia will never be able to exist without the south. And I think that the first thing that northern Russia, or Great Russia as it's called, will probably have to hold in case something happens is the bread basket. And the rest will be left to the self-assertion of the local political arrangements that could be made by the central government. And it's a very difficult problem to visualize, but I know a friend of mine who went to Russia, and he was a friend of Lenin's. I won't get his name. He has even a letter of commendation by Lenin for his good work. He went to Russia, but he was a Menshevik, and therefore non persona grata in the Soviet government. And I was astonished that he dared go there. This was during the time of Khrushchev. And told me what he'd done. I told him, how did you dare do it? He said, well, I had the letter of Lenin with me, and I said, well, you sort of followed? He said, no, I didn't notice. But he said, in Moscow, you had to be more careful. People didn't talk. But in the provinces, and he went all over Russia, he said everywhere they talk quite freely at the time that was of Khrushchev, and criticized the government. I said, well, what do you think is going to happen? He said, it's very difficult to say, but I think it could be a gentleman on a white horse. But would it be good for America, for the United States or not? That I couldn't tell.
Colonel Obolensky, do you foresee any modification of the rigid Marxist doctrine permitting a restoration of some measure of capitalistic distribution system, and possibly what could happen in the future of the Soviet regime?
I'm afraid I don't see that at all. The system is very rigid, and even if you watch Mr. Khrushchev, whatever he talks about and whatever he says is never really sort of, when it comes to he has to go back, there's a strong group in the Communist Party who'd never let the thing down. And I don't think that the Soviet government will ever give us a contract or sign something that would be against the interests that are dictated by that hardcore group of communists, many of them never having left Russia, and therefore very chauvinistic. On the other hand, they have some very exceedingly able engineers and businessmen who are very anxious, and the government is anxious, to get the best possible economic deals with the capitalist world, and that they're doing with great alacrity and very well. Now look at their deal with the wheat and the corn last year. There also their contracts with various tools, even whole factories that are supplied not only by America but also the Fiat company building cars for them. That they'll do, and they will try and get as much as they can, but behind it all, they'll still feel the power of the control that is put by the fear of every citizen in the Soviet Union would have the fear that he had of something could happen with secret service and so on. So you always must remember that every citizen in Russia has a mark in which he works. And he is not free to move without a permit. That a lot of people don't realize. You get a permit to go for a vacation. I don't know how often it's given to anyone for their merit, but otherwise, everyone there is tied to their job. And they can't move without that permit.
Colonel Obolensky, during World War II, while you were serving overseas with the OSS, did you have any opportunity to observe the capabilities of the Soviet armed forces? And did you have any contact with their generals, their commissars, or their foreign envoys in Europe or in the United States?
No, in direct contact, I never was with the armed forces of the Russian army. But I met several of their generals, admirals, and ambassadors. After my first jump into Sardinia, when I got back, the Russian ambassador in Algiers was Mr. Bogomolov. And I got a message from him through a third person that he'd like very much to meet me. So I went to General Donovan and asked, who was my general then, what shall I do? So the general said, by all means, find out what it's all about. So I said, I'd certainly be delighted to meet the rector. Well, the message came out when I dined at the Russian embassy. So I agreed, I said I would, and on the given date I went there, and there was an ambassador, there was a general, and there was an admiral, and several members of the staff. They tried me, first of all, with vodka. I saw there were big tumblers on the table. They poured a full drink of vodka, which I know is a custom in Russia, even in Tsarist Russia. And they went to the American army. This was right before dinner. So we drained that whole tumbler of vodka. Then they poured a second one, and I knew that I would have to respond. So I went to the gallant Russian army who was making such a beautiful stand in 1943 at Stalingrad. And that we Americans are really proud to be connected with large, great effort. We finished that tumbler, they poured a third one in. I was giving a little bit with it, but the third one came to the old Imperial Guard that taught us how to do it. Well, I was rather stunned by that, but I thought, well, this is very likely to think so. Then the ambassador broached the subject. I knew something was coming. Would I like to come back to Russia? So we already with 3 drinks of tumblers of vodka, I blurted out a bit too far, there's no thank you. I said, what was? I said, well, I'm very happy in Russia and in to the United States. I have a family there. I'm working. So there's no point of me moving. And apart from that, I said, you didn't want to. He said, don't say that you didn't want to. You didn't want to also. I said, well, I'm not going to haggle about it. But in any case, it was an offer. And later on, being great friends with Admiral, and I invited him to dine with me at a restaurant in Algiers. And we got on exceedingly well. And one of the things that struck me was that he said, you know, why did you fight it? I said, well, because I was brought up on the playground of Oxford. I believe in the parliamentary form of government. He said, you're wrong. The Russians need to be heard. Otherwise, he's too individualistic. So, that was my contact with the Russian ambassador and the admiral. And later on, I used to, being in the hotel business, I had Mr. Granico staying at the plaza, where I had the plaza, and I had met him several times, and he came to my parties. And Madame Granico, I very often sat beside her at dinner parties, very charming woman, and we were quite friendly, but otherwise I didn't have many more opportunities. So, as regards the question, oughtn't do we trade with Russia? I said, by all means. The more we trade and the more we do business, the more there are contacts between the Soviets and their citizens and ours, the better it is for both sides. And slowly the atmosphere of distrust could gradually, I hope, evaporate. But at the moment, you must always keep in mind that the system there is a very rigid one. They, I think, they don't want to come into a conflict at the present moment with us, especially as we have good relations with China. I think that is one of the great moves of President Nixon with Kissinger to get things going with the Republic of China, because it sort of evens up the pressure, the political pressure on the world political spectrum.
We are going to continue this tape on the other side. There has been 9 questions directed towards Colonel Obolensky, and this tape is prepared for the audio-visual facility at Duke University, and we're having a dialogue with Colonel Serge Obolensky. And we'll continue the tape on the opposite side for the final question. This is J. Rutherford for Duke University. Long Island, we're making a recording on Saturday, August 21st, of an interview. This is tape 2 with Colonel Serge Obolensky. Colonel Obolensky has responded to a series of philosophical and perspective questions in history. This is an audio tape test. See how the sound is working on tape 2. Colonel Obolensky, how do you want to be remembered by future generations? What is your legacy for students, scholars at Duke, colleges throughout the nation and the world.
Are an extraordinary mixture of education, philosophy, and business acumen gathered during my life. First of all, educated up to the age of 21 in Russia, the Russian gymnasia, the Russian university, and later the Oxford Christchurch, where I studied political economy, poor law, and local government. All that preparing me for my work, which I hope to be in the local government and the government of Russia. My father, being a general of the old school, but a liberal, believed in giving me a philosophy of life which prevailed with me to the end. And that is that you owe everything, first of all, to your country, second, to your family, third, to yourself. He wanted me to go by elections, the elections in the local government, and do all I could to make the local government work. Therefore, in the most democratic way possible. And that was happening right up to the last years before the start of War Number 1. I was at Oxford at the same time. Half of the time I spent in the country looking after the agricultural side of the property. We had an experimental farm. We had special breeds of wheat, rye, oat, and so on that we produced. We got stallions from Africa, England, both for heavy work and for remand purposes. We had cattle that we brought in from abroad to better the breed of local cattle. All that was being done. At the same time, we did a great deal, and I was very much interested in the development both of the agricultural know-how of the district. There are special, they call them agronomes, men who were experts in agriculture. There were cattle experts. There were medical medics with hospitals in each town. There were veterinary surgeons. All that was being done at the time. Also, the thing that was so interesting was that the local villages were encouraged to have their cooperatives. They had the selling cooperatives and the buying cooperatives, which are central organizations in Moscow. The peasants, all very often during the religious, during Lent, they didn't eat butter or anything fattening, so they got a lot of milk that was processed into butter and cheese. We taught them how to do it. These products were sold, were shipped to the central organizations who sold them on the market. The result was local benefit by the local cooperatives. The buying cooperatives at the same time, through their vast organizations, were able to buy products like clothes, shirts, boots, shoes, etc., at a very cheap price, which they resold at a very small profit. That was happening all through Russia. And Russia, to me, was booming. Apart from that, the federal government was under the tutelage of Stolypin, a cousin of mine who was prime minister, organized the distribution of land. There's this big estate of mine. I had to cut a big chunk of land by each village that was in the vicinity, and that was divided into farms of 100 or 50 acres. The government, federal government paid us by bonds, and at the same time financed the local government to build a house and a barn, and also to finance on, I think it was a 5 or 6 year contract to International Harvesting Company to implement the farmer with the machinery necessary to till the land. So you see, that was all happening before the war, and I think, and I believe, that Russia would never have a revolution. We were already well on the way of gradual change from very severe autocracy to more liberal form of government with elections which already were taking place in the towns, and elections which were for the Duma, and I'm sure we'd have weathered the storm of revolution if there hadn't been for that war.
That was Colonel Serge Obolensky. I think we have here a very historic and revealing document. I would ask the auditors to recall that the auditors to eliminate the part of any introductory material, biographical material on Colonel Obolensky completely. And so you open up with the sequence where I introduce, since so much of biography and history of Colonel Serge Obolensky has been preserved in his epical book, I'm going to enclose a copy of the official biography, which is to be used and just excise any introduction up to the point of where we open this script. This is for the Duke University Library, and I thank you. It's August 31st, 1974. Viewed the recording with Colonel Obolensky in New York 1 week later on the September 11th, and he raised a number of points which he wished amplification and clarification, and we also felt that the answer to question 10 should be redefined so that we accommodate the substance of the question. I'm going to ask Colonel Obolensky to question 10 again, so you can use the content of question 10 as the original one, but it actually is more germane and applicable to the material in question 1. But it's all of historical substance. So I'm now going to ask you question 10 again, and that will constitute the substance of the interview. Colonel Obolensky may have some points that he wishes to amplify to support the substance of the interview, and we'll do that on a separate tape. So for the time being, I'll be back with question 10. Colonel Obolensky, how do you want to be remembered by future generations? What is your legacy for students, scholars, at Duke, colleges throughout the United States, and throughout the world?
Thank you, Serge. I remain one man in this man, simply an ex-Russian of particular background and family, the foundation of whose existence were destroyed. I believe that for myself and for millions of Russians who once lived under communism, the terror and the hardship of those days did not for an instant destroy our faith, our interest in the world, and our love of life. I do not mean to imply that I was a typical Russian, but that the attitude I expressed and the qualities I possessed were those of many Russians, and they exist in Russia now. On looking back, my life seems to have been several things at once. A political life in the emerging Russian democracy and its institutions that was ended by the war and the revolution. A military life in the last great war of horses and men, the swan song of cavalry warfare that dated from the days of Genghis Khan. A social life amongst people all over the world to whom I was allied by heritage, from whom I was removed by circumstances and by the end of the role that the princely families had played in Russia. Those of us who escaped from Russia had perhaps quite a bit of reason to be discouraged about the future. But on the whole, I think we still try to give what we could in our varied fields of endeavor, whatever they were, literature, art, music, science, or simply the service of society. And I think we successfully overcame any tendency in ourselves to despair. I myself feel it to be a work of consequence to do what one can to provide pleasure for people, to serve others. I take it for granted that our primary objective in the lives of men is to have a good time. If, in my own small way, I have added to people's enjoyment, then I have succeeded. Whatever the completely opposite successes of the Bolshevik regime. I do not say that our own government in the United States is perfect. We have our own failings. Democracy doesn't always function as it should do, but it's certainly the best form of government that has yet developed on this earth. More pleasant to live under than any other, and offering more freedom and promise for a better life for all men under the law. Once again, the future of the world is obscure, yet it holds for us the promise of beauty. When we jumped into Sardinia, there was a moment when our parachute seemed to hover motionless over an unknown world. I could see the vanishing shape of the plane we had left, and the floating silver chute of my men who were with me. On the one side lay the shadow of the mountain, and the other was a strange volcanic cone with its fairy tale castle atop of it, and deep down below us lay a future which we could not penetrate. We did not know what we were going to find, but for an instant, as we descended, I realized that I had never seen anything more beautiful than the scene that lay before me as we poised over the unknown. As far as I am concerned, this is a story of democracy, a way of life that has grown stronger through wars and through revolution, and is unshaken despite the seeming recent success of anti-democratic forces.
That is the story of one man in his time, Colonel Serge Obolensky. Today is Wednesday, September 11th, 1974. Colonel Obolensky was born in a leafy park near the summer palace of the Emperor of Russia. That was October 3rd, 1890. You have caught on this tape one of the most sweeping, romantic, and dedicated stories of a passionate patriot, a great American, and an unusually innovative and modern man for his time who lived in war and peace and made this a pleasanter world than it was in October 3rd, 1890. We're going to play this back, and this goes for the W.R. Perkins Library, Duke University, as a dialogue for future scholars. This is Jay Rutherford of the Duke University Audio-Visual Facility, ending the recording of our interview with Colonel Serge Obolensky on September 11, 1974.